Welcome to Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2013 Setup and Upgrade New Features. Data encryption. In this session, we'll discuss how Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2013 introduces a data encryption feature to encrypt a limited set of default attributes. Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2013 uses SQL field-level encryption for a set of default entity attributes that contain sensitive information, such as passwords. With this release, encryption is only enabled on passwords used for email and also to encrypt the Yammer token. This encryption feature cannot currently be extended to additional fields. Data encryption prevents a database administrator from accessing encrypted data. All new and upgraded organizations will have the data encryption feature enabled, and you cannot turn off data encryption. By default, a random key is generated for the encryption key. Microsoft Dynamics CRM users who have the system administrator security role can change the encryption key. So as mentioned, there is a default encryption key that's randomly generated at the time of setup. Let's take a look at how you can change that encryption key. If I go to Settings, and then within Settings go to Data Management, you'll see that there's a data encryption option now. One thing that's important to understand is if you try to go to this area without using HTTPS, so if you just did HTTP in the URL, you'd get an error message. The other thing too is if you do configure this for HTTPS, so you are accessing using an HTTPS URL, you do need to make sure that Deployment Manager is configured to use HTTPS for the CRM URLs also. Otherwise you will still get that same error message. So here I'm going to click Data Encryption, and if I click Show Encryption Key, on a brand new installation you would see a bunch of Unicode characters displayed here, and that would be your default encryption key. One of the things to be aware of is that if you're ever moving to a different deployment of CRM, one that has a different MSCRM_configuration database, you'll need to make sure you have this key that's copied from the source environment, and you'll have to provide that in the destination environment to reactivate that encryption key chain. And that's because part of the encryption key chain is stored in the configuration database, so if you ever switch to a different deployment, that's going to have a different configuration database, so you need to re-provide that encryption key to reactivate that chain. So it's very important that you have this copied before you move to a different environment. So you can also choose to change the encryption key. So I'm just going to provide a new key here, and you can see as mentioned below there are certain requirements. It needs to be between 10 and 100 characters, have at least one number, one letter, and one symbol or special character. I click Change, and what this will have to do then is use that existing encryption key to decrypt the current data that's encrypted, all the different email passwords, and then it'll use this new encryption key to re-encrypt those passwords. And it's done, and that's how you change the encryption key. So you've seen how you can view or change the encryption key within Microsoft Dynamics CRM. We mentioned you needed to be a system administrator, but there were some privileges introduced to be able to add this to other roles. So if you went into a security role and looked at the miscellaneous privileges section, you'd see that there's 3 privileges introduced, and they all start with Manage SQL Encryption Key. One is for change, one is for activate, and one is for read. So you could grant these to additional roles, and you could be able to control who can change the encryption key, who can activate an encryption key, or who can read an encryption key. So as mentioned earlier, one scenario where you need to make sure you know the encryption key is if you're going to move the database from one CRM deployment to another. And again, that's because that encryption key spans across the organization database and the configuration database. So if you move to a different deployment that has a new configuration database, you'll need to restore that key to be able to reactivate the encryption chain. When you are importing a CRM database into a different deployment, you'll get a warning in the system checks if it is encrypted and you're moving it to a different deployment. And this is what that encryption warning will look like. So once you import that, after you're done, you'll have to activate that encryption key chain. And you'll navigate to the encryption feature just like we did when we went to view or change the encryption key, and now it'll look a little bit different. You'll see that the current encryption key is grayed out, the encryption status shows inactive. What you'll need to do is provide that encryption key from the source environment, paste that in there, and then click Activate, and it'll successfully reactivate the encryption key chain. This ends the data encryption session.